Now, a few disclaimers before I begin. I bought the Mark II with my own money, so I have absolutely no relationship with Oxi other than being a customer. And I pre-ordered this when it was available, and I've had this for a little over 13 months now. So I feel like that's long enough to form an opinion on a piece of gear. Now, I have made several hours of tutorials for the Oxi One, which are quite popular. So I think that's probably why you are watching this video right now. Okay, let's start with the things that I really like about the Oxi. Now, the hardware is very good quality. It's like a solid aluminum body here, very nice black finish. The pads feel nice. The pads on the grid here are a little bit squishier, and then the buttons here are a bit more stiff feeling, but it's overall a nice feel. The encoders are, they click, and you can click them as well like this. Everything just feels very solid and works very well. The only issue I really have is that sometimes I find that I don't press the buttons with enough force, so that's why I'm often really hitting the button quite hard. Now, the screen is it's a little bit bigger than on the Mark I. I think it's a fairly decent sized screen with quite a bit of information on there, but this relies a lot on the grid for basically the information. Okay, now there are a lot of menus here you can find, like configuration menu with a lot of options. There you can find your project menu with a whole lot of options. There are a lot of things in here, and it is quite a handful at first. But the Oxi One is actually quite simple to use once you get over the initial learning curve, and it becomes actually quite natural to use this. And this is actually better than the Mark I to use, because you have more of these function buttons here, so you get dedicated buttons for more functions, which means that there are less of these sort of obscure button combinations. Now, there is plenty of MIDI and CV connectivity. You get your MIDI out, MIDI in on TRS jacks type A, and you get clock connectors, CV inputs and CV outputs, 8 of them, and gate outputs, 8 of those as well. So you get like MIDI and 8 CV and gate, which is quite a nice amount of connectivity. And of course we have an HDMI mini port for the pipe in this one. The Mark I had a micro HDMI, which is a terrible connector. So this is a much more solid connection. So a lot of sort of improvements overall over the Mark I. And what I really like about this is that it's really fast to get started with a track once you know how to use this. You can just make a few patterns and start jamming. And I really enjoy that. There's something just very inspiring about this sequencer. But it is a step sequencer, and it comes with some of the limitations of a step sequencer. And I really like the generative features here. Make them basically makes it easy to have variations of patterns and make your jams sound a little bit more interesting. Now, for the things that I don't really like about this, the workflow can be a little bit confusing sometimes. Even though there are more of these buttons here, you still get some obscure button combinations that you just have to learn by heart. So, for example, the activating the drum pattern generator in the multitrack sequencer requires a combination of buttons that sometimes I forget if I haven't used the pattern generator in a while. I'll just be fumbling around trying to find the correct combination. So some of these combinations that are not on the panel here or marked on the panel here can still be a handful to learn. And of course, sometimes the updates change some of the combinations. So for example, the scene capture in the arranger, which populates a column in the arranger with the patterns that you have loaded in each sequencer, used to work so that you just hold the arranger and tap a column, but suddenly after an update it was changed. I don't think it was actually documented anywhere. It was not in the release notes as far as I could tell. So right now it's suddenly like you go into the arranger, hold, and then you hold the column, and then it populates this. So it's like changing an existing button combination and not telling the users that you changed it. So things like that are a little bit annoying and make this harder to use than it should be. Now another thing is that it's not really well suited to composing like traditionally. So you're not going to be thinking in measures and time signatures unless you really like 4/4 and whatever measures you get when you lengthen the pattern. You will be thinking about music in patterns and steps more than in the traditional notation style of composing music. Now it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just how it is. This is maybe more related to these old school step sequencers than to notation or anything like that. So it is what it is. Now another thing about documentation is the manual, which it's mostly decent, but there have been several times when I have been making a tutorial video and then I want to check that I'm actually showing everything that's relevant, and then I find like feature in the manual and it says it works like this, and then I try it on here and it doesn't work, and then I have to figure out how it actually works, and it's completely different than it says in the manual. And that's of course not okay, but they are working on it, and I'm sure the manual is already in a much better place. I haven't looked at it in a while. And for other issues, I had a major hardware issue with my Oxi One. I think the gate outputs were sending out gates were replicated on several different outputs when they weren't supposed to be. So I got in touch with Oxi. They of course fixed it for free, but it meant that I was without the Oxi for a couple of weeks. It's not, of course, the end of the world, but it's not. It's always not nice to have to send in like a brand new piece of gear for a hardware issue. And about the updates, which are, it's very nice to get constant firmware updates, but I kind of feel like more than a year in, and I'm still participating in a beta test. So it doesn't feel like it's actually complete, and it's certainly not bug-free. For example, firmware 2.0 was advertised heavily when the Oxi turned 1 year old, and it was launched in a very buggy state. Basically, several old features were broken in the update, and to be fair, it was a beta, but it wasn't advertised as a beta. So I would have preferred that they simply keep cooking and make sure that it's as bug-free as possible and do like proper testing on the firmware before releasing it. Now, I understand the pressure to release new features. It's probably a highly competitive market, but it's not a good look when you put out an update that breaks a whole bunch of features. Now there have been updates since, several firmware updates, and bugs get fixed, but then again sometimes new bugs are introduced, and that is quite frustrating. So quite a few times I have been in a situation where I am either doing a tutorial video or I am making a track, and then I run into something that is a bug, or maybe it's not a bug, something changed but it wasn't documented anywhere. So then I'm just thinking like, okay, why does this not work like it used to? Should I report the bug or should I find a workaround? So quite often I will simply give up and find a workaround, and then maybe if I have the time I will write a bug report or something, but it can be quite frustrating. Now for those who are thinking about getting an Oxi One, now should you get a Mark II or a Mark I? Now Mark I can be found for much cheaper, maybe at least half price used compared to this one, and it is a very capable sequencer. It has most of the same features as the Mark II, and Mark II has more of almost everything, and it is a nicer device to use. But the Mark I has most of the same sequencer modes. It has very similar capabilities, but I would say I really like having the 8 sequencer tracks here, so I can just have my setup so that I have my MIDI synths on the first 3, then I have these 4 here for my Euro rack, and then the last one for my drums and stuff like that, so I don't have to constantly be changing things. So I can just keep this as a constant, and everything is always basically available. So basically the Mark II is a really good choice if you want the extra sequencer tracks and all the extra features that are here. Now most of the time I would be fine with the Mark I, but this is certainly a much nicer user experience. So in conclusion, I think that at its best the Oxi is a very inspiring piece of gear. So it's a very nice way of getting started with tracks. It's very immediate sequencer in many ways. Even though there are a lot of deep features, you don't have to get into those at all, actually. And you can basically just wade in the shallow end and have a lot of fun with this.